1958, a book was published authored by Eugene C. Gerhart. It was the first book of any note on the life of Robert H. Jackson. The preface states, "There are certain real advantages in commencing a biography during the biography's lifetime. Contemporary comment of living witnesses is available to the writer. The author is able to meet the biography personally and to examine in retrospect aspects of his past life with him. This valuable opportunity was afforded me by Mr. Jackson. Our first interview took place on October 8, 1947, our last on March 19, 1954, shortly before his first heart attack, which ultimately resulted in his untimely death on October 9th of that year. During this period of almost 7 years, we reviewed together in detail the important events of his life. At our last interview, he remarked, 'I think you have exhausted the sources.' In 1961, Mr. Gerhart wrote a sequel. The reason he did so is that he had intentionally omitted a detailed analysis of Justice Jackson's Supreme Court opinions in The America's Advocate. In this supplemental study, Mr. Gerhart presented an analysis of Robert H. Jackson's work, not in the advocate's role he loved so well, but rather as a judge. That he was a, quote, lawyer's judge, end of quote, few who knew him will doubt. I have the pleasure of introducing Eugene C. Gerhart, who was born in Brooklyn on April 7th, 1912. He did his undergraduate work at Princeton University, graduating in 1934, and received his law degree from Harvard University in 1937. Member of the New Jersey Bar in 1938 and the New York Bar in 1945. He practiced in Newark from 1938 to 1943 and in Binghamton from 1946 through now, which is in the law firm of Coughlin and Gerhart in Binghamton. His resume is extensive, and among the highlights is that he was the editor-in-chief of the New York State Bar Journal from 1961 onward. Today, we have the opportunity to hear his speech entitled, "A Tribute to a Great American Lawyer." Here's Eugene Gerhart, Binghamton, New York.
Very much, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here with you again and to add some additional thoughts in this tribute to a truly great American lawyer, Robert H. Jackson. It is indeed, as I say, a pleasure to contribute on this occasion to your splendid memorial honoring a great American lawyer whom we all admire and respect, Jamestown's son, Robert H. Jackson. It is entirely fitting and proper that we should do so. Bob Jackson left a great record as a county seat lawyer from Jamestown. He was outstanding as a United States Supreme Court justice. His part in the international trial prosecuting the Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg after World War I was unique. Here in Jamestown, New York, you really honor the memory of this great American lawyer of whom you can be mighty proud. Like Lincoln, Robert H. Jackson did not graduate from college, but his record proved, as his briefs and arguments proved, that he was most effective in his choice and use of words. Although he later got a degree from Albany Law School, he didn't actually graduate from the law school. He was already on the Supreme Court of the United States. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt wisely selected him to be the United States Attorney General. Justice Louis D. Brandeis of our Supreme Court praised his work in that office, saying, "Jackson should be Attorney General for life." As a Supreme Court justice, Jackson himself stood for integrity, honesty, and independence. When he differed as a justice in a case in which, as Attorney General, he had earlier advised President Roosevelt, he later changed his mind when the case came before the Supreme Court of the United States. With typical Jackson good humor, he said, "I see no reason why I should be consciously wrong today, because I was unconsciously wrong yesterday." My favorite Princeton professor of politics, Alpheus Thomas Mason, was proud of what he called his 18th century liberalism. Jackson, in my own opinion, was not a knee-jerk intellectual liberal. He was for the underdog when the underdog was right. But the underdog is not automatically right just because he is an underdog. Jackson's dissent in the Supreme Court decision involving the American concentration camps in World War II is worth quoting. Korematsu, born on our American soil, was an American citizen of Japanese ancestry. The Supreme Court permitted such people, although American citizens, to be incarcerated on the West Coast as part of a wartime military expedient. Jackson dissented, saying, "My duties as a justice as I see them do not require me to make a military judgment as to whether General DeWitt's evacuation and detention program was a reasonable military necessity. I do not suggest that the court should have attempted to interfere with the Army in carrying out its task, but I do not think that they may be asked to execute a military expedient that has no place in the law under the Constitution. I would reverse the judgment and discharge the prisoner." Korematsu versus the United States. After World War II, Justice Jackson was our leading American advocate in the prosecution of the Nazi war criminals in Nuremberg. This was a move by international law advocates to hold individual men responsible under international law for their crimes against humanity. At Nuremberg, Jackson, as America's advocate, was on a world stage. The world today is following in the precedents he and our allies established. John W. Davis, a leading New York appellate lawyer, said after Jackson's argument at Nuremberg, "Jackson's final argument was one of the greatest examples of advocacy I ever heard." Winston Churchill and others said that the history of mankind is the history of war. The peaceable alternative to war is to enforce law. Society needs rules of conduct which must be enforceable, because without order and enforceable law, society can accomplish very little. Mobs protect nobody's rights. The hierarchy seems to be this. First, we need order. Second, we need rules of conduct, which we call law. And third, we need a recognized superior to enforce the laws. The Holocaust in Europe, World War II, is an example of what happens when fair laws are not enforced. In this new millennium, we can still find a struggle going on in the Middle East, in Africa, in Ireland, both North and South, in Russia, in the Balkans, in South America, and in the South Pacific. Religion alone has not brought what we call peace and order to the world. The alternative to struggle and war is enforceable law. Leave to live by no man's leave underneath the law, as Justice Jackson said. If we are to have that, we need the kind of men that Robert Howard Jackson exemplified in his wonderful essay, The County Seat Lawyer. Here are Jackson's own words. Quote, "This vanishing country lawyer left his mark on his times, and he was worth knowing. He read law in the commentaries of Blackstone and Kent, and not by the case system, Harvard. He resolved problems by what he called first principles. He did not specialize, nor did he pick and choose his clients. He rarely declined service to worthy ones because of inability to pay. Once enlisted for a client, he took his obligation seriously. He insisted on complete control of the litigation. He was no mere hired hand, but he gave every power and resource to the cause. He identified himself with the client's cause fully, sometimes too fully. He would fight the adverse party and fight his counsel, fight every hostile witness, fight the court, fight public sentiment, fight any obstacle to his client's success. He never quit. The law to him was like a religion, and its practice was more than a means of support. It was a mission. He was not always popular in his community, but he was respected. Unpopular minorities and individuals often found in him their only mediator and advocate. He was too independent to court the populace. He thought of himself as a leader and lawgiver, not as a mouthpiece. He lived well, worked hard, and died poor. Often his name was in a generation or two forgotten. It was from this brotherhood that America has drawn its statesmen and its judges. A free and self-governing republic stands as a monument for the little known and unremembered, as well as for the famous people of our profession. I recall once Bob Jackson said to me as I approached him about writing his biography, "Nobody would be interested in reading my biography." My legal assistant, Mrs. Lorraine Wagner, and I interviewed him on numerous occasions in Washington. We were delighted when he invited his own secretary, Mrs. Elsie Douglas, to have lunch with us in his chambers. He had a way of making ordinary people feel completely at ease. I commend Jamestown and its lawyers for erecting a monument here to one of America's greatest lawyers. The statue of a great American advocate will be a continuing inspiration to future lawyers and judges, as well as to American citizens who stand for fairness, integrity, fundamental decency, and honor in American law. I am happy indeed to be able to contribute to this memorial ceremony. I salute you all, and mostly Robert Howard Jackson, whose life is an enduring memorial in the law.
Terrific.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. That's terrific.